the biomes of the world. Right from polar deserts to mountains, highlands to oceans, have wetland regions. Wetland is a place where plants grow in soil that is soaked with water. They often cover small areas and are scattered within other biomes. However, some of the wetlands are as big as one whole country. These wetlands are classified into two categories, namely marsh and swamps. Marsh is a shallow water wetland and has small plants. If the shallow water is covered with trees, then it is called a swamp. Second to the tropical forest, wetland biome is a safe haven for wildlife. With the development of civilization, human beings started conquering forests, forcing the wild animals to flee. There was no place for animals to survive, so they migrated and took refuge in wetlands. But soon, humans started looking towards wetlands. For many years, we human beings have considered wetlands as unhealthy breeding ground of mosquitoes. This forced them to destroy the wetlands. In addition to this, many of the wetlands were turned into dry farmlands. Their shapes were altered to support growth of rice. It was not long before wetlands started being exploited by humans. But with greater awareness of the biomes, now the thinking has changed. We humans have come to realize that besides protecting wildlife, these wetlands purify water and also protect coastlines against erosion and floods. This is Hudson Bay. The lowlands and the marshy plains lying south and west of Hudson Bay form one of the world's largest wetland areas. It remains frozen for most of the year and springs to life only during summer. Thousands of years ago, during the Ice Age, when the Earth's climate was much colder, both the bay and lowlands were covered by a vast sheet of ice that kept pressing the land down. Gradually, as the ice started to melt, it allowed the land to slowly rise back. Even today, the land is still rising, creating a new low-lying land along the coast, forming salt marshes. Hudson Bay has been named after an English explorer, Henry Hudson, who disappeared in the year 1611 after his crew cast him adrift in a boat. This bay is full of whales, seals, and walruses, making it rich in marine wildlife. More than 99% of Hudson Bay lowlands are an unspoiled wilderness. Many migratory birds and polar bears, along with black bear, wolves, caribous, and moose can be found in the forests surrounding this place. The earth has so many different varieties of wetlands that it becomes difficult to classify them. The reason for this great variety is the forces like the movement of earth, weather, and flowing water that perform together in different ways. Many of the wetlands are low-lying areas where water gets collected. This low-lying land is formed due to many reasons. Sometimes, powerful forces in the Earth's crust pull the land apart, resulting in some areas of the land to slip down. The flowing river deposits sand and mud in these sunken areas, as a result of which massive flat plains are formed. The Okavango Delta in Africa is one such plain which is formed through this process. On the other hand, the prairie potholes in Western America are formed in a different manner. These are in the form of thousands of small circular wetlands. At the end of the Ice Age, huge blocks of ice were left stranded and sunken in the land. Through the centuries, these melted and the holes became prairie potholes. Rains are the main source of water in most of the wetlands. Some desert wetlands spring to life during sudden rainstorm, which may occur once in several years. There are some wetlands that stay wet even in the middle of the deserts. They are known as oases. These oases are formed mainly due to rainfall in the distant mountains and the rainwater flowing underground to this wetland. Many wetlands grow and shrink with the seasons. This happens in the tropical countries which have rainy as well as dry seasons. In rainy season, the wetlands can grow thousands of kilometers wide, while during the dry season, they shrink enormously. In cold countries, with the arrival of spring, ice and snow starts to melt. This leads to flooding of wetland. During this time, only quick-growing plants survive here. While in tundra regions of Alaska and northern Canada, ice remains throughout the year and permanently frozen. Water cannot drain away, so this place has special type of wetland known as bogs. Unlike flat, marshy places covered in water, bogs are special kind of wetlands. Bogs get most of their water directly from rain rather than rivers. Rains bring very few nutrients, so the water in bogs is infertile and acidic. Only certain plants like moss can cope with this condition. Fen is something similar to a bog, but unlike bog, fens get their water from the ground rather than just rains. Hence, these tend to be more fertile and varied plant life is found here. Tropical wetlands rarely experience snow or ice, but there are other more volatile conditions that affects them. During a dry season, lightning can start wildfire even in wetlands. This leads to growth of small plants instead of big trees. Hurricanes too regularly hit the wetlands in tropics. Their violent winds flatten tall trees and create a different habitat with more varied plants. Many of the world's biggest wetlands occur near large rivers which flow through flat plains. If the river carries lot of sediments, the wetland becomes rich in nutrients which help the plants to grow. The most spectacular of all rivers is the Amazon River. This river floods every year. 1/5 of all the river water flows down from this one river and winds its way for thousands of miles through the world's largest tropical rainforest. This river and its tributaries flow through a gigantic area of low flat land called Amazon Basin. Amazon Basin is the largest river basin in the world. It includes many different kinds of wetlands as well as tropical rainforest. It was formed millions of years ago from the sediments brought down from distant mountains. Geological forces began to build towering mountains of Andes, blocking the river's route to sea. The whole basin then became a huge swamp without an outlet. In rainy season, this river submerges the surrounding land under so much water that river dolphins sometimes swim through treetops. The trees of this amazing flooded forest are able to spend half of the year underwater. Unique animals like caimans, manatees, piranhas, and the giant anacondas, which are world's largest snakes, are found in this region. River deltas often play a major role in conserving the wetland biome. When a river meets the sea, the water slows down and drops its sediment. This forms a flat area of land that grows out from the shore and is known as delta. It often contains rich mixture of fresh water and saltwater wetland. These are sometimes used for farming. The dead plant matter here does not decay easily, as the waterlogged ground stops air from entering in, thus creating an airtight area. Due to lack of oxygen, dead plant matter builds up into dense black substance called peat. This peat contains many undecayed parts of trees, some of them even thousands of years old. The remains of ancient plants in the lower layers have enabled scientists to study what could have been the Earth's environment in the past. Some dead prehistoric people too have been found in peat bogs. In fact, they were so well preserved in the peat bogs that scientists could tell what their last meals were. For hundreds of years, people have made use of fossil peat. This peat got buried deep underground, where heat and pressure slowly converted it into hard rock. This is coal, which we humans have been using as a form of fuel for burning. Coastal wetlands are regions where salt marshes and mangrove swamps are found. These are generally formed on low-lying coasts where rivers or sea currents deposit fine sediments in which plants grow. In cooler parts of the world, salt marsh plants have to cope with both salt water from the sea and fresh water from rains and rivers. Tropical coasts are regions having dense jungles. Mangroves are trees that grow in these dense jungles between high and low tide. They grow only in warm water and have tangles of roots above the ground. They also trap river sediments, allowing it to build up and later turning it into dry land. One of the world's largest mangrove swamps are the Sundarbans of the Ganges Delta on the east coast of India and Bangladesh. Sometimes, some wetlands act like a vast, slow-moving river. These are also known as Everglade. The word Everglade means grassland covered with slow-moving water. The Florida Everglades is famous for such grass-filled rivers. The only plant that grows on Everglades is the sawgrass with razor-sharp leaves, and the amazing thing is that it can grow taller than a person. Thunderstorms are the main source of fresh water in Everglades, while in dry season, wildfires are very common here. Close to Florida, near Lake Okeechobee, is the Everglade Wetland of farmland. This place has small, dark squares, which are used as agricultural fields. Along this farmland is the filtration marsh, which prevents agricultural pollution from reaching the Everglades. Wetlands are home to some very peculiar plants. Imagine a lake full of reeds and yellow stalks, some 10 feet tall, and cold wind hissing through them. You will find the place like a grassland field with hard ground. But watch out! If you try stepping in this wetland, you will be absorbed by peat and bog in no time. These wide array of plants give wetland a unique look. The giant water lily of the Amazon is one of the great wonders of the plant world. Its tray-shaped leaves grow up to 2 meters wide and is strong enough to support the weight of a small child. The flowers of this plant are pollinated by beetles. Once they are fertilized, the flower sinks to the bottom of the water and releases seeds on decaying. These seeds then float away in the water before sinking again and growing into new plants. It is believed that all wetland plants evolved out of dry land and gradually they got adapted to life in water. Water lilies, for example, probably evolved from land plants around 100 million years ago. These plants had enough time to adapt to water. Plants also have to cope with soggy or flooded habitat. These are bogs, which are cold and have few nutrients. The plants here are small and low-growing, like sphagnum moss. Many plants like reeds and sedges are emergents. That is, they have their roots and stems underwater but leaves above water. In some wetlands, floodwaters can raise living plants to form enormous floating meadows. Like in Africa, a special kind of floating meadow forms from papyrus plants, whose underwater stems detach from the bottom and float just below the water's surface. These papyrus islands drift in open waters and lakes and sometimes clog up the harbors. In wetlands of Amazon, these floating meadows can hold together for months, providing shelter to frogs, fish and other small animals that live here. A small area in the wetland can be home to dozens of plant species living together and competing for space. Then how do these wetland species survive? While observing the edges of a shallow lake or river, we see different plants growing in different places around the edges. Some plants grow in soil that is slightly damp, while some grow in marshy areas. These are plants that even grow in deeper water. Looking at these plants, one can conclude that these plants grow where they have best conditions for growth, but it is not so. The fact is that many wetland plants grow much better in dry places than where they are usually found. Then a question arises, why don't they grow in the wild? The probable answer is that the other plants crowd them out in the wild. So these plants have found a safer haven for themselves and grow in wetter places where the other plants cannot survive. Trees also have marked zones in wetland where they grow and can survive regular flooding. But if the flooding occurs too often, then these trees find it hard to survive and die. This gives rise to grassy wetland between the trees and river. The wetlands at the edge of ponds and lakes face the danger of completely disappearing. The reason behind this is that year after year, the dead leaves and sediment piles up on the wetland and ultimately dries it out. This gives way to other plants and trees to grow, and in due course of time, the wetland can totally disappear. But under certain circumstances, like fire and heavy flooding, all the plants and trees that have taken over the wetland may die and the wetland is saved. But then the above process starts all over again until another fire or flood occurs in the region. It is interesting to know that the plants of wetlands often fight to survive and at the same time also help other plants to grow. Like, there are plants that are good at transporting oxygen down to their roots. They help increase the content of oxygen in the mud surrounding them, thus helping other plants to grow there. It is not necessary that the plants of wetlands reproduce by seeds. There are plants in wetlands like reeds and bulrushes that do not worry about making seeds. They spread along underground stems. But reproducing by seeds has great many advantages for any plant. One of the unique advantages that the seeds are a product of sexual reproduction between two parents that mixes the genes of both the parents. Offsprings created in such a manner are genetically unique and all have different strengths and weaknesses. This prepares the offsprings for their uncertain future. On the other hand, looking at the plants that grow from underground stems, one finds that they are genetically identical to the parent. The greatest disadvantage is that the offspring also share the same weakness that the parent plant has. These offsprings are not unique in themselves and are not capable to adapt to any uncertainty that may occur. The other advantage of a seed is that it helps a plant to spread to long distances. Like the bulrushes produce thousands of light, fluffy seeds that blow for miles in wind. Birds also play a great role in spreading the seeds of wetland plants to far-off places. The sticky seeds of grass-like plants called rushes stick to the feet of the birds or their feathers and travel to far-off places along with the birds. Many plants, like water lilies, have fruits or seeds containing air spaces or drops of oil. This allows them to float in water and cover long distances. The mangrove trees have a variety of their own tricks for their offsprings to flourish. There are mangrove trees that produce seeds that sprout while it is still attached to its parent. Such plants are called viviparous. These young plants grow several feet long before they fall on the ground or in the water below. If the young plant falls on the mud, it gets anchored by its spear-shaped roots. If they fall in water, they float away and take root later on. The cannonball mangrove uses a trick in which its football-sized fruit explodes when ripe and scatters the seed in every possible direction. In addition to these seeds, wetland mud is home to thousands of seeds waiting underground for favorable conditions to start growing. These seeds in reserve have been given the name seed banks by the scientists. These seeds can wait patiently for hundreds of years before they start growing. In a cluster of plants growing in wetlands, there are plants that eat animals. Just like carnivorous animals, there are carnivorous plants. But the interesting fact is that they don't eat flesh to obtain energy, but to fulfill their need for nutrients. It is interesting to know how these carnivorous plants originated. Most of these plants live in boggy area, and the waterlogged soil contains very little nutrients. But insects have in them the nutrients missing from the soil and needed by the plants. So these plants eat insects to supplement their need of nutrients and survive when other plants would perish due to lack of nutrients. There are a variety of traps that these carnivorous plants use to capture their victims. Pitcher plants have cup-shaped leaves that partially fill with water during rains. These plants lure the insects with a sweet-smelling nectar. As the insect comes close, it falls off the slippery surface. The slippery walls and backward-pointing hairs stop it from escaping. The victim drowns and the plant digests it. North American wetlands have widespread pitcher plants, but the largest pitcher plants are found in Southeast Asia. These large plants trap lizards as well as frogs and digest them. Sundew plant uses a different technique. The small leaves of sundew plant are covered with hairs, and each hair is tipped with a sticky drop of digestive juice. As soon as a fly sticks to one of the hairs, all the hairs gradually bend over the insect and trap it. Then the plant easily digests the trapped insect. Bladderworts are floating plants whose underwater leaves grow tiny cup-shaped chambers, also known as bladders. If any tiny aquatic animal bumps into the bladder, a trap door opens and the victim is sucked inside. Then the trap door shuts over it, locking the little species. Venus flytrap is the most remarkable carnivorous plant found in Carolinas in USA. People here grow this insect killer as a house plant to get rid of the insects of their house. The plants growing in salt marshes have a lot to contend with. They have to face not only flooding regularly, but also cope with water supply that is sometimes salty and sometimes fresh. This condition is not favorable for all plants to survive, but plants like cordgrass can survive this because its seed sprout only in salty water. Another odd plant that survives in this condition is glasswort or samphire. It has juicy and succulent stems that are edible. Mangroves face the challenge of living in salty water. Their roots are capable of filtering the salt out of the seawater, but some quantity of salt still gets inside the plant. To get rid of this salt, many mangroves secrete salt through their leaves. This forms a white crust. There are few mangroves that concentrate their salt in bark or dying leaves. As the dying leaves fall off the plant, they take the salt with them. Across the world, there are about 60 species of mangrove trees and they are not related to one another. Their tangled roots can form dense thickets that can be extremely difficult to travel through. Okavango Delta in Africa is one of the wildlife wonders of the planet Earth. While most of the river flows into the sea, Okavango River flows inland and ends in a vast sun-scorched plain. Here, the water spreads out and evaporates, forming the Okavango Delta. From the air, the Okavango Delta appears like a patchwork of pools, rivers, and grassy islands. The animals living here find themselves protected from their predators, as the terrain is hard to cross. Crocodiles and hippos are the permanent habitats of the delta, while other animals visit during the dry season in search of water and fresh grazing grounds. These traveling animals in turn become the prey of lions, leopards, and cheetahs that live in the surrounding savannas. The Okavango Delta is also home to more than 600 bird species ranging from water birds to ostriches. With such a vast range of animals and birds living in the delta, Okavango Delta has become one of the world's top ecotourism destinations. But the ecology of the delta has to face great many pressures from human beings. With increase in cattle ranching, the ranchers have erected miles of fences to stop their cattle from catching diseases of the wild animals. These fences are no less than disaster for the wild animals, as they cannot reach the water of the delta. Some animals are even burned to death, while bushfires trap them against the fences. Even though steps have been taken to curtail the damage, Okavango Delta still remains in danger. Wetlands have been playing an important role in the lives of humans as well as animals. In the next part, we will study how animals and us human beings have benefited from these wetlands spread across the planet Earth.